Hello, folks. This is Race Matters, and I'm the host, Eddie Carson. You're listening to 96.3 Joppa Radio, Newburyport, Massachusetts. You can find Race Matters on YouTube, on SoundCloud, and on my website, ProfessorCarson.com. Like we do every episode, we delve into the nomenclature of thinking about race, class, gender, and the cultural elements that kind of form our differences in terms of how we think about different things, but yet what brings us together as we seek to be informed more and more and more. And like every episode, I'm just a soul man, and I bring these great folks on who can inform us on things that extend beyond my knowledge and my expertise too, and a supplement in the ways in which we think about what does it mean to exist and to live in communities. And that's part of why we are here. That's what we're doing. Folks, like every episode, I'm excited and I have a great guest. I want to introduce you to Deedee Schiano, who is just a wonderful, marvelous human being whom I've known now probably for about, I don't know, oh, 6, 7 years. And Deedee does just some fantastic stuff, and we'll learn a little bit about her as we continue to move forward. Deedee lives in the North Shore of Massachusetts with her husband and her two adult children. She is originally from New York and moved to Massachusetts after attending college, where she earned a BA in communication. While attending Simmons School of Social Work, Deedee became a clinical social worker for the past 30 years, practicing in multiple medical and behavioral health settings. Deedee has a strong clinical skill, including behavioral health therapy, crisis management, advocacy, and care coordination, leadership, clinical supervision, and program development. This sister feels most at home working in a community and being presently employed at a school-based behavioral health clinician in the North Shore community. She provides a lot of aspects, folks. I mean, when we talk about some of the challenges and things we're seeing continuing to unfold here in the 21st century, she is in middle and high schools working with those students in Salem, and particularly thinking about how to work closely with, her colleagues, staff members, families, and other community stakeholders to really make sure that students receive the adequate care, that compassionate, judgmental support that's necessary. She is passionate about advocating for equal access to basic human rights, including medical and mental health care, housing, education, nutrition, employment, and other community support too. And those are some of the things that we're going to delve into because she is a true community leader and advocate for advancing folks. Deedee has been on the North Shore NAACP since about 2020, so the past 5 years, and particularly thinking about elements when it comes to housing and education. Those things are phenomenal and stuff that we have to think about. So, Deedee, welcome to the fold, my friend. Welcome to Race Matters. How you doing?
Wow, that's a big introduction. I'm blessed to be here. I'm so excited to be able to talk to you, Eddie. And I just feel like there's so much that we could spend time talking about and so many things that are important. And I just want to thank you for all that you're doing in the community with this podcast and, speaking out, the education that you're providing. It's so critical for us to be on the front lines. And I'm just blessed to know you.
My friend, that makes two of us. And I like to engage in communities and think about myself as an organizer and an activist, but that is some stuff that you've been doing just mighty work with for a number of years. But before we delve into that though, I want folks to get a little bit more of a feel for you and everything too. Tell us a little bit about your own trajectory that led you in terms of doing the kind of work that you do to educate, inform, and provide the care for community folks that's needed.
Yeah, so it's funny, Eddie, when I was a kid, my mom used to call me the little lawyer because I would always say that's not fair. So from the start, I kind of was an advocate, maybe not always for things that were appropriate when you're a kid, but it started there. I moved up to Massachusetts after college and I was working at a corporation and I volunteered at Rosie's Place. And I was so moved by the experience that I took a half cut in my salary. I left that corporation and started working for a nonprofit that helped people to get back to work, building software. And so that time period, I did some case management and just figuring out what people's needs are. I really didn't understand mental health diagnoses or fully understand substance use issues at that time, but that propelled me to go back to school of social work. And, I think every experience I've had has reaffirmed the importance of advocacy, providing support for people in need. And I think it's really important to clarify that I am not an expert on really anything except for making sure that people get connected to the services that they need or understanding what people's mental health or substance use issues are. I always feel so blessed and honored to work with people because I learned so much from them. And that's kind of what I generally say is, I'm sure I'm going to learn as much from you as I learned from myself. And that's the beauty of, the work that we're doing. And in my core, I don't believe that it's right that we have people who do not have access to basic needs, and whether that's food or clothing or medical care, feeling safe in our community, being able to walk down the street and not be judged, harmed, you know, discriminated against because of how they look or where they live or who they are.
I appreciate hearing that. And again, right, the admission of the fact that, you claim, which, I slightly disagree, not to be this professed expert, but someone who's into the thick and the fold of things, particularly the things that are challenging a lot of communities. One of the things that I know, of course, is that, in the North Shore of Massachusetts, but also nationally, we've witnessed and we've observed firsthand the painful intersection of housing insecurity, poverty, and mental health crises, particularly among young folks, as that continues to expand more and more and more. We're at a particular stage now, too, where folks are ignoring this sense of mentality where folks need to just pull themselves up by their own bootstraps and figure it out and learn and grow and mature. And yet, we're seeing cuts in programs and folks feeling under attack for trying to help and love on folks better. How do you respond to this crisis in the North Shore of Massachusetts? But yet we know this is a prolific issue nationally.
Yeah. So Eddie, when I graduated from School of Social Work, I had the honor of getting a job as a case manager at an organization called Cambridge Cares About AIDS, and I was in Central Square. And I was able to participate in the syringe exchange program, which was around helping people with harm reduction and substance use. But the other case management piece was also helping them with their other biopsychosocial needs. And housing, we know, is the primary source of support that someone needs to stabilize. Without that, everything else becomes much more complicated, right? Where are you going to put your belongings? Where are you going to put your medications? How are you going to keep your kids safe? And just also a feeling of dignity, which is really critical. So I guess I go back to that time, mid 90s, and I did work with people who were diagnosed with HIV or AIDS and multiple other complicated medical issues. And there were long wait lists then, right? And so now, 30 years later, we continue. And I know there's this mindset of a community of people who say, well, if they just got a job, or if they just worked hard, well, those opportunities were not given to those individuals. The majority of the people I worked with had a trauma history. They experienced many facets of trauma growing up, but you don't have to have a trauma history to have lack of access to housing, and safe housing and housing that you would feel comfortable in. So it has always been, and it really will be, the most critical issue. And I strongly believe that we need to open our communities up to everyone. I can give you an example. Present day, on the housing committee of North Shore NAACP, I have the honor of also knowing the Harbor Light program, which has done a phenomenal job of building different housing programs for people in need. So those are for people who either can't afford the rents, which we didn't even talk about. They're outrageous. It's more expensive than paying a mortgage. So, and this would be 30 or 60% of your income that you could pay. And many of these programs also have like a case manager to help those individuals on site. So I am seeing that work happening. However, what really alarms me is the pushback, right? Not in my backyard. We don't want those
Yours.
people in our community. There's going to be more crime. And a lot of that is masked by people talking about there's going to be more traffic. Our schools are going to get too crowded and they're going to use up all our water, which is really, really more of a front for saying we don't want those people here. Because when the big houses get built, nobody complains, right? And what people don't know is places like Harbor Light that build a larger structure where different people can live within that building, that it's much more energy efficient. And it is able to manage the use of water. And so, yeah. So that's kind of housing is critical.
There are a couple things you said there that really got me thinking just a little bit too. One, when I think about housing, oftentimes people think about this mentality of shelter, a place to go, but that shelter is not always a home or a place to go, right? Where are you going to have a place to hang that picture, place that book, kind of relax and recoup for your own mental sake in order to re-energize in different ways. A place to call home, a place to be at. And oftentimes we do operate through this shelter mentality. Well, let's just place them in this particular spot there, and then that's going to be their home. But that's not a home.
No, it's not a home. And I can say huge props to all the organizations that have support people who are unhoused and that organize, ensure that there are services within a shelter. That's critical. However, that's the place where illness can spread more quickly. Like you said, what most of the patients or clients that I used to work with would have a bag on their back, and that's all they could carry, right? And then with a shelter, many times you have to be out by like 7 a.m., right? Then you've got to get on the list. You don't get a guaranteed spot in most shelters. Then you got to get there by like 2:30 or 3 sometimes to get a shuttle to where you're going. Or if you're not there by the cutoff date, then you're bumped out of the list. The other thing is most shelters require that it's a community of sobriety. And I'm totally for sobriety. However, people who have substance use issues should have the opportunity to be able to sleep somewhere too, and have the dignity for that. Many, many years ago, and the program is still happening, is a program called Housing First, which I think has been spread across the country. I'm not sure where it stands right now with our current administration, but Housing First is a program where people, if they're actively using, you're still going to make sure that they get housing, and you're building that bridge to treatment. I mentioned harm reduction. Harm reduction is a program, an approach to care where you're building that bridge and you're meeting the person where they're at, and you're saying, maybe you're not able to stop using. Can we help you to reduce the using? And you're always providing education. These are the resources when and if you're ready to be able to get care. A lot of those people have never been spoken to with dignity, with empathy, and unconditional acceptance. People are really judged and they're afraid of struggling with these issues. So it becomes really hard for them to ask for help. And unfortunately, we have so many people that there are not enough resources. And of course, we know the funding is not going to, there's never enough funding.
I remember mostly from my studies, obviously, and observationally when I was much younger, going back to the 80s under the Reagan administration, and how we know the challenge there, where they essentially criminalized mental health. They criminalized being unhoused, made you feel somewhat like a second, not a second tier citizen. I'm talking about a second tier human being when we
Yeah.
talk about issues of dignity and everything. You use the word that I just want to kind of circle back to, and that is, folks are afraid that if you start building this and building that, and you'll bring in the others, the wrong population. So I want to explore that for a little bit, because what I've discovered, and this is particularly true, I'm going to make a generalization here, among New England liberals. I'm not even talking about the conservative folks, among New England liberals who are, Black Lives Matter, we want to support the unhoused. They have their pride flags out, but yet, again, generalization, many of those folks are also the first in line who say, we are worried that if you construct this, those others will come in. And henceforth, what tends to happen, of course, is that we know that is coded language for people who look like me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm not going to skirt around that at all. I think people are all for helping, but when it becomes their specific community, and the other mentions are, I don't want to become like, for instance, I live in a small town and I don't want to become like that city. I don't want to become like those people. We're going to lose the quaint community that we have. There's even restrictions on who can go to our beach now. I'm
Oh,
lucky enough. Oh yeah. Yeah. It can only be residents. Now, there was nothing, and I'm sorry that I missed going to the select board meeting for that. But you have to be on it constantly. But and we also know that there's a very, very small percentage of people who can access beaches. That's a whole other story. But
absolutely. And
every,
there's a long racial history. I mean, because we're
yes,
talking about a different level of segregation here
yep,
that's taking place. I mean, you say that, and I'm sitting there thinking, wait, I've heard this before. I'm thinking back to the 60s and 70s, certain communities, the whole the rise of gated communities,
yep,
right?
yep,
These own sundown towns that are being
right,
created.
right. I would, if it were up to me, I would open our communities to everyone. The the challenge is that we need to make sure there's enough funding to be able to do that, and we need to have the voices to advocate for that. But to me, the diversity, and maybe I haven't mentioned this yet, but probably one of the most gratifying and what's the right word? I just feel like I've grown so much from it, engaging with people that are of different cultures than myself. I've learned so much. I love to understand people's different cultural experiences, and I want to honor that. I do that in my clinical work. And I right up front say, if at any time I ask you a question or say something that offends you, please tell me, because that's out of ignorance. And I want to make sure I can honor fully who you are. I don't think we do that enough. There's this, it has to be this way, the cookie cutter, tradition. I'm not for tradition unless tradition is welcoming and inclusive. Tradition for tradition's sake needs to get right out the window because it makes no sense. And I think a lot of times those traditions are exclusive. So, and I'm talking from my experience. I don't know, I can see for other people, but why is it so hard to welcome and support other communities? Why is it hard to be kind and loving instead of this hate that's going on right now? I can't imagine what it feels like to be the person that's hating on people all the time. I gained so much from engaging with other people, and I want to be able to help. I want to be able to support, ensure that what I have, and I do consider myself privileged, that other people can have too.
You know, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about this idea that I'm not going to go into this whole sociological dimension, which you can just, there are tons of books and lectures given on the fact that there is, in a way, this certain mentality that exists in which, let's care for ourselves, let's worry about ourselves and not really extend what that looks like. But yet, I also know there are folks in communities. I recently had Reverend Rebecca from the UU Church in Newburyport and the work that they do. But yet we also know too that there are organizations that can't do all of this necessary kind of work, whether it's churches,
Yes.
other nonprofits. And
Yep.
yet, I'm a big advocate and believer that this is where individuals, we all formulate this notion called the government comes together to support each citizen. But yet, there's a clear divide here where
Mm,
folks, first thing they'll say is, I don't want to spend my money on those people or any of
right.
that stuff. That's not my problem. They
Right.
should go to church and do that where these places can't support people.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And I think it has to be from the top down. It has to be an altruistic approach to care and inclusivity. And we're a long ways away from that. I wanted to get back to what you had mentioned about the white liberal community not always being so welcoming. What I find is when I bring that up with people is there's a defense like, well, wait a minute, but I'm this or I'm that. And I'm like, the biggest thing people can do for themselves is to pause and say, I need to reflect on myself. And I'm not perfect. I know I have discriminated against and I have my mindsets, but I'm doing the work, right? And I'm going to fail. I'm going to fail. When we think about the LGBTQIA community, I have dear loved ones that I mispronoun, and I step up and I don't profusely apologize because that's putting the burden on them, but I say I'm going to do better. And I'm okay with someone calling me out because I'm going to learn from that. And, I think there's this group of people where they're like, oh, well, it's the politically correct police. But that's really kind of a cop out. I think when we address people, we want to ask them, and again, this is something I should have presented, that my pronouns are she, her. That's something I'm working on. But
But it's right, it's right. And for the listeners on the radio,
yeah,
they don't know that. Those watching this, you have it right there on your screen.
yep, it is. It is. And I wear that out there, but I always want to know, I want people to know that I'm welcoming. I'm not going to judge. I want them to know I'm a safe person. I am a privileged person to be a white person. Um, that does not mean, I think, when I was younger, I was in that camp of like, I'm going to go and save the world and I'm going to help these Black people or I'm going to help these whatever. No, it's not my agenda. I need to speak to people who are being discriminated against so that I can understand what they're experiencing and how I can support them. If it's a female issue, I'm going to be right up front about what my needs are, what my community is. But I think it's okay for people to understand that this savior role can be very problematic because you don't know what you're doing, and then you're continuing to oppress by not asking those that are
Mm.
being discriminated against what they need. So yeah,
No, that's
the voice of those who are being discriminated against should be at the front of the decisions of what they need and the services they should be getting that don't exist.
and I appreciate that. And I appreciate you owning your shortcomings. And I like to think that I own my own too. And I've also had what I call the Joe Biden syndrome at time where you put your foot in your mouth.
Yeah,
Right. And I think, that's also called being human. And we kind of grow and we learn from that too. One of the things I am most troubled by, and you see this particularly in the North Shore, and this is happening everywhere, is the escalation of home costs and finding places to live. It seems to be the trendy thing. And that trendy is, again, that's buzzword for gentrification to
mhm,
really invite kind of this cool hipster vibe into the scene. I'll be the first to raise my hand that I've engaged in that type of behavior. I've set my little coffee houses on the corner and thought, oh, that's pretty cool. But yet, when I look to my left and I look to my right, then I look at communities, particularly communities of working class, poor communities of color, especially like Lawrence, Massachusetts, and I can go on and on and on. You have luxury apartments, luxury homes popping up. And
yep,
I'm struggling with this desire to understand this demand for such a narrow population of folks that probably already own another home or two somewhere else.
right, right. Or it's the new up and coming place. Well, and I think you're speaking truth to the fact that there are a lot of corporations that are buying up homes too, right? And that
Airbnb in their engagement, in their work.
absolutely. And I think it's all about it's all for me and none for them. It's that uh I think we live in a real society that, this focus on capitalism, and that I can never have enough. And not to pause and say, even the millionaires, billionaires, whatever they are, their income should be shared, and it should be supported. We are seeing different famous people doing that, but it's not enough. Um, you mentioned Lawrence. I know Lynn, that's happening. They're on the commuter rail, and so now they're being built up. I moved here in 1988, and I lived in the South End, and it was this amazing, diverse community. And since that time, it's become extremely gentrified. It's impossible to be able to buy anything. All of those places where you could rent, are now condos. So again, that's another area where people are pushed out. I even went down to Central Square. That was where my first job was. I was down there yesterday. Uh, and I thought, oh my gosh, this isn't even recognizable, you know?
Mm.
So I think about those communities and their tradition and their culture, and where have they gone? Where have they been pushed out to?
Do
So,
you do you think people don't care, too busy, just unaware, maybe even of ways in which they contribute to this type of mentality, this behavior that's becoming problematic and damaging to folks who are unhoused and people who were once housed have now become unhoused,
right,
and it has even nothing to do with even mental health or drug addictions.
right. So I think what you said is so true. I have people I know that will say, I can't even listen to the news. It's too much for me. Um, from a real place of privilege where, you know, putting your head in the sand and stepping away is part of the issue, is that if we don't all come together and step up and donate to organizations that are critical, like the ACLU or the NAACP or wherever, I think it's so important that we need to ensure funding to be able to fight for people's rights. We're in a huge crisis right now in our country. And yes, we're focusing on the North Shore. I feel privileged to be in a state that is, you know, fighting for equity in a lot of ways, but there are a lot of problems here too. So, yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, people, my mom used to say, a lot of people don't look past their navel, right? They don't want to see beyond what they know or what they see. I got to tell you, Eddie, I don't know if I didn't work with people that were impoverished initially. And I love the fact that I started in community-based, because I think when you go to like, you become a social worker and you go to private practice or you go to like a major organization, you don't really understand and get to know. And I shouldn't assume that, but from my experience, I was in people's homes. I got to know their families. I got to know their history and to understand what they have had to experience, where they've come from. And a lot of the times it was because they were born in a zip code that didn't have the resources for the education that they needed, or, they're in a place that is, they don't have access to healthy foods. How, whatever, we could speak about that for a while, but there's this automatic assumption that like people are, they're born and they're like, oh, I want to be on welfare and I don't want to work. And there's such a small percentage of people that are actually abusing the system. It's a tiny percent. And everyone who uses those resources needs them. And they're working hard to move off of those resources. So yeah, and I think the problem, Eddie, is that people speak from lack of knowledge and more through anger and not understanding who these individuals are. They make up a bunch of stuff because they feel that those, they're not deserving. And it just makes me crazy when people really don't understand and see those individuals for who they are, and what their needs are.
As we think about some of those challenges that are there, one of the things that I'm curious about, and I want to ask you, when we talk about issues of the unhoused, we talk about issues of mental health, the mental health crisis
Yeah.
here in the United States. It's a hard question, but maybe it's not a hard question, but I'm curious. Is this a race issue or is this not a race issue? Is this a race and class issue? What kind, and we like those categories to help us make sense in terms of where do we fit folks in?
Yep.
Where does this fall in here?
I think I always look at the biopsychosocial model. I do absolutely believe that people who are Black and brown do not have access to the same services of people that are Caucasian. On top of that, if you're in a class, there's certainly white people that are impoverished, have mental health issues, and substance use issues. What's interesting, Eddie, is in the 1990s, I was working with people who had addiction to heroin, had addiction to crack cocaine, had so many different issues, but not until it became a problem of the wealthier community was it even thought about being addressed.
Well, we see that with opioids in many ways too. This
100%
was becoming
opioids. Exactly.
a suburban affluent crisis, not just in rural America, not
Yes.
just in the urban hood.
Yep. Suboxone slash buprenorphine. I was talking to patients about that in the 90s. Were there programs about that? No, there was no access to that, right? Um, I think I would never, ever negatively speak about someone who has more money that's struggling with mental health or struggling with substance use issues. However, that person is going to have a lot more access to the resources that they need, a commercial insurance versus a state or federal insurance. You're going to get a heck of a lot more, right? You can go to a private facility, you can get the therapy that you need. Most people with Mass Health, nobody takes Mass Health unless you're a community health center where I work, right? And those people are going to be cut because of our current administration. So where's their health going to go? And the most important thing to know is that that doesn't hurt just those individuals. It hurts all of us,
I love that.
right? It hurts
Absolutely.
all of us. And so that's, again, why we have to step back and stop looking at our lives from this tiny lens, right? We've got to open it up and be more inclusive and advocate and ensure that everybody has resources. Look at the countries that have, healthcare for all, and also have mental health care and take care of their elderly, right? And have communities where people who have dementia have programs where they're well supported and well staffed. Those are just some examples. And I think in our society, in Western world, but I can speak out about the United States, if it doesn't equate to a dollar sign where you can make money off it, there's no investment, you know?
I mean, you're right. The crime of capitalism that's there, that which is another whole conversation there. No, you've done a lot of work with middle school, high school age folks. Do you see or have you observed any trends among that population that there is a predictability factor that they will become unhoused
Mm,
as they move on, or if and probably, we know, which we're going to get to in a little bit, the number of LGBTQAI plus folks who are unhoused, who've been kicked out of their homes, who are struggling with different things. But is there a predictability factor, a way to intervene in your work, or is that difficult?
yeah, so I want to jump to the unhoused first for the LGBTQIA community and just teens in general.
Hmm.
I had the honor of clinically supervising a team of people who ran a program that still exists called Youth on Fire. And that is, I think it's still based in Cambridge, but it was a place where people who were unhoused and they were teens kicked out of their homes for multiple reasons, a lot of times because of their own mental health issues or the fact that they were not the child that their parents expected. Many kids who fall within the queer community. And so my point is, there should be more programs like that where you can get access to help with getting a job. You can get access to finding housing for yourself. You can get access to healthcare. There are organizations like that, but we don't have enough. So back to your question about the middle school and high school. It's funny, Eddie, my first internship, which was in 1995, 1994, I was at a middle school in Boston, and it was a very different approach to care. It was like this scared straight model with my supervisor at the time, and I just didn't get it. I didn't like it. I liked some of the staff there, but I thought, I can't do this. And I wasn't mature enough to say, well, maybe I can do it differently. I knew I was going to do it differently as a clinical supervisor, but I just stepped away from working with kids. Then I had two kids of my own, and I've had exposure and a lot of education. So I didn't come back to working with kids until a few years ago. And I feel like I've come full circle, and all of the work that I've done previously, I think, is why I was able to come back. But to your question, in the school districts that I work in, 72% of the families are impoverished. All of the kids can benefit from the food program that they have, which in our state is an incredible model where food is given to all kids, so that previously the children who had to have the food were identified as those are the kids, on welfare. Those are the kids.
Mm.
So the destigmatization of that was really critical. There are a number of families that we work with that are unhoused. And sometimes they're being bused from a place that's like an hour and a half away because they are from the city where they should be going to school. So there's a lot of resources around that. So if we had enough housing for individuals, then they wouldn't have to go through those stressors. Additionally, I think the other piece that's really concerning is the substance use issue and the access to substances at such a young age, especially vaping. I don't know if people realize that a vape pen is 29 times stronger than a pack of cigarettes. And I don't
Wow.
think we don't really have a model to be able to help kids to come off of that. I've worked with kids who are struggling, and the fact that it's so accessible to them, then that obviously affects their mood, affects their ability to perform academically, um, you know, affects their trajectory. How is that affecting their brain? And that's not just for nicotine, but for marijuana too.
Mhm.
So again, we're working in a harm reduction model where we're working with kids to see how we can help them. And we work with families. Some families have to have, work 3 jobs to be able to pay that rent. Some families are afraid to send their kids to school because these are hardworking people who pay their taxes, who came to the United States for a better opportunity because they weren't safe. They didn't have access to the resources they needed to take care of themselves, and they wanted to have that dream. And our immigration system is a mess, so they made the choice to come. I strongly believe those people are not illegal. A person is not illegal. Someone made a choice to come here for a better life. Yes, we need a better system for that, but we shouldn't penalize people who are working hard. So my point is that, it didn't happen all the time, but parents are afraid to send their kids to school because they're worried, will they be able to come home? What will happen? Or people who are leaving their houses in the morning or even their shelters worried that they're going to be picked up. So I don't know where our country is going, but it's really worrisome, and we have to stand up and fight for it.
I mean, and again, standing up, fighting, really thinking about that next element in terms of how do we make things better. And for folks, if you're just joining in, this is Race Matters. I'm Eddie Carson here, and I am here with my guest, Deedee Schiano, and we are really engaged in thinking about kind of the crux of and the crisis that a lot of communities in Massachusetts and in North Shore, Massachusetts, throughout this country are facing. I got to tell you, and not to get overly political here, but it seems like everything is, and it's hard to really walk away from that too. I
Mhm.
remember thinking, I'm a big fan of this guy out in California named Gavin Newsom. And then I started hearing a little bit more about him, particularly how he's thinking about unhoused communities and communities that are dealing with, wrestling with substance issues and things like that. One, do you have any thoughts and opinions on the California issue? Two, is the state of Massachusetts doing all the things right that could be a model? And if not, is there any place in the US that's doing it right?
Right. And are you talking about Gavin Newsom, the encampments and clearing people
That's
out?
correct.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a complicated issue. I will put that right up front.
Please do and understand my right because my
Yes,
own ignorance and what I understand and what I know. So I want to raise my hand
yes,
and make sure I admit to that.
absolutely. I think we can always point to the person that's in that tent as the problem, but there are many systems that are failing that have caused those individuals to be living in a tent. I can say, I know even down in Boston, they have cleared encampments, and they had offered housing had offered resources for substance use treatment. I think the problem is that, and I don't have the answer to this problem, I can tell you that right now. I think the problem is that sometimes people aren't ready to even be housed, aren't ready to get treatment. I'm not sure I know what the solution is for that, but I do know that we still need to treat people with dignity. The complicated piece, I think, and I don't think it's a very large problem for the whole community, is around safety. And if, there is any risk of safety for anyone involved, you have to provide support. A lot of times, I think there's assumptions made about those people who are unhoused. So I never think it's the right answer to lock people up. For that, I think what we need to do is offer resources, build that bridge to treatment. I don't know. I don't know of anywhere in the United States where it's working. I can tell you the syringe exchange program started out in Portland, Oregon, and then Washington, and then here we started it. So that's another harm reduction model, but I don't know about housing. But I look at countries where they don't have a housing issue, and it comes back to the fact that they take care of people from the start. They offer people and ensure that people have resources. There's a big controversy around creating a space for people who are utilizing opiates and giving them clean needles in a safe space so that they don't overdose and die. I can tell you from my experience, we are not encouraging use if we give clean needles, if we create a space, if someone uses that they can use Narcan, which is a life-saving medication. You don't want to throw people in an office and say, here you go. You're building relationships. You're speaking to people about what their needs are. A lot of times when I worked with people who, if they have mental health issues, if they have legal issues, and their goal is housing, that's what you're going to work with them on, right? And you can work with them on those other things. But if you can help someone to get housed, or if that's their primary goal, then you can get to the next goal, right? And then the goal after that. But if there's not this strong network of helping people, I don't know what to do. But if we really step back, we've created these problems.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's
We've created
interesting.
these problems.
I mean, I love the way you frame that too, because right, those things come from other issues that have kind of trickled down that can compound
Absolutely.
these things, and we haven't really delved into it. For a long period of time, our fear about talking about mental health, the role in which class plays in this, and we can go on and on and on. Because again, it's that pull yourself up by your bootstraps and figure it out,
Right.
and that's not an issue. And it's interesting because insurers now are covering, I believe, more folks who are struggling with their own mental health issues. And it seems like, a lot of people have a therapist and everything too. But and again, I'm going to say this, the word therapy feels like it has become so bourgeois lately. I mean, folks, everyone has a therapist. I have a therapy for this, I have a therapy for that, right? I live in my 3,000 square foot home, I have this and that. But yet, people who might actually need that aspect of therapy, along with other resources and support too, absent. No
Right.
conversation about that.
Well, and okay, so a couple of things.
And correct me if I said anything wrong,
No,
please.
I don't think you did. I think that we're also in a society where we're moving medical care and mental health care to self-pay because our insurance organizations make it so hard to be able to get access to that care. I also believe I work for a community health center. I think it's one of the most important places. It's a safety net I'm at risk of maybe, I don't know if I'm going to have a job in a couple of years because that's the funding that we receive from the federal government. I'm going to be fine. I'm not worried about me because we're in demand right now. But what a loss for those individuals who need those services. One thing I wanted to step back on, which we really didn't talk about, is the cultural piece around mental health, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's a real fear around mental health. And there's the same belief that, like, just get over it, you'll be fine. You can figure this out. And I think what's interesting is that if someone had diabetes and they needed medication for the diabetes, you take the medication. But if you have clinically diagnosed depression, part of that we know is chemical. It's not always, but we know that people with mental health issues greatly benefit from using a medication. You don't always have to, but many people have benefited from it, but there's even that fear. So either going to therapy, you can't talk about because nobody, whatever culture it is, certain cultures, you need to keep that within the family, or you can't even talk about it within your family.
Well, and I mean, I'll be the first to say too. I mean, this is a taboo issue in the Carson household growing up. We can talk about therapy and this and that, and I'll be the first, right? I encourage folks who need to reach out for resources to do so. But I'm part of the problem here too, my friend. I have this mentality like you know what? I will figure it out. I will will it. I will deal
Yes,
with it. And
yes.
that is locked. And truthfully, I'm not even sure that mentality within me is going to change anytime soon.
No, and you know what though? So mental health, I can't assume anything about you, Eddie, but you are a successful person who navigates and does the self-care. I think that when so for mental health, we diagnose it as a mental health disorder when it's affecting your life in a way that you
Mhm.
can't function, right? So you can't properly physically take care of yourself, right? Your what are called your attention to daily living. You can't get out of bed in the morning. You can't keep your job. You can't concentrate in class because you're so depressed or so anxious, or you have attention issues. So I'm not saying let's throw the book at all medication. And I think medication alone doesn't work. I think doing the therapy works. I also see behavioral health therapy as like tuning up your car. You shouldn't have to go to therapy for forever, but if there's a specific thing that you want to work on, it's having a non-judgmental person listen and be compassionate. Um, there are specific therapies that are critical, maybe like for people with obsessive compulsive disorder, that gets in the way of your life, that you can no longer function. Um, that's when I really believe it's important for people to get the care that they need. Um, I know that a lot of people push through things and their mood, they struggle so much to have peace and happiness when, you know, they could be open to speaking to somebody about it, that it might help.
Mm.
So those are just some of my examples, and I appreciate your honesty. Um, same thing with substance use. You have to be ready with mental health to even identify that you're struggling.
Yes.
Um, and, you know, people might not be ready. Um, Harm reduction has Prochaska and DiClementi have this stages of change model. And the first stage is pre-contemplation, where you won't recognize that you actually have a problem. You don't even want to think about it. Then contemplation, where you're considering that you have a problem, but you're not ready. Maybe you're preparing for the change. And then you're in the action phase where you actively work at it. Then you're in the maintenance stage where you've dealt with it. But then there's the relapse phase. This is not like a straight You're going to
Mhm.
be back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And I think that's with anything, whether it's food or, self-care. Um, you got to meet the person where they're at.
No, I appreciate that. And again, oftentimes it's like when I teach my classes, right? I have to remind folks that, you've seen progress and change in some areas over a 40, 50-year period. But, the assumption is, Brother King got up and he gave a speech and all was cured just like that. And it doesn't work that way. And I think that's part of our mindset too, in terms of how we engage.
Right.
So, my friend, as we are nearing the end of a fantastic conversation, I've learned a lot. I'm informed, and for the folks who are viewing, who are listening to this, I hope you are really soaking and taking a lot of this information in, because this is one of those things, right, that I've kind of gathered from you, Deedee, that usurps all aspects. Though there are factors when it comes to issues of race and class and gender and all of these stuffs, right? We understand the dimensions of those aspects that are there because
Mhm.
identity does matter and how
Absolutely.
we think about those things. So, Deedee, what I like to do on every episode of Race Matters here
Mhm.
at Joppa Radio 96.3 is I like to give my guests the last word. And that can be about anything you want to share. My friend, as I do with everyone, every episode, I'm putting you on a spot and I'm giving you the last voice here.
All right. I guess what I'd like to share is those that are sitting on the couch and, watching all this go by, I'm asking you to step up, use your voice, and advocate for those in need. And then just on a larger scale, connecting with community, being kind to other people, being open to share the resources that you have, whatever they are, financially, education, community. It feels so much better than being angry, being negative. There's so much that you can get from connecting, the connection and being with people and being kind. I guess that's my pitch.
That was beautiful. Thank you, my friend. Folks who have chimed in, this is Race Matters. Until next episode.